You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 253. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Welcome to today's podcast episode. And oh dear, if you are stuck in a decision right now, you have come to the right place. First of all, can I please give you a big hug? If you are sitting trying to avoid making a wrong decision, I feel for you. I think we have all been there. We are probably all there right now in some domain of our lives. And it's a tough place. It's a tough place because you have a decision to make. You're probably looking at your options. You're probably saying, well, I could stay the status quo, and that's going to have the devil I know. And you're probably looking at your alternatives and thinking, well, those are okay, but what if? And if the decision that you're trying to make is a big one, like shifting jobs, shifting careers, if it's moving houses, moving cities, you might have decisions in your personal life that involves friendships or relationships or a decision that's going to impact on your children. There are so many choices, so many decisions that you make every day. And some of those decisions are easy, no problem. And there's other decisions that weigh on you and you find yourself mulling over them for weeks, months, years even. And that can feel really frustrating. It can feel draining. And you might be asking yourself, what do I do here? What do I do with this decision that I don't want to make the right decision? And so instead of making a decision that is moving in a different direction, you make the decision not to make a decision and stay the status quo. And yet you feel like, something's got to give here. But how do I move through this? So today's podcast episode really is just some guidance. It is comfort. You're not alone. And hopefully some tools that will help you to reconceive of this decision that is on your mind and also give yourself some grace and some ideas about how to move forward. If that's what you decide to do, you can stay the status quo, which again is making a decision. You are moving forward, but can you do something? Can you make a decision in such a way that you will not feel like you are making the wrong decision? So I'm going to offer 3 different suggestions, 3 different ideas to help you through this. And as I do that, what I'd love for you to do is think about the decisions that are on your mind right now. I would say that the decision that I most often coach my clients through that are heavy, the decisions that people are really having a hard time making, are the ones that are related to big career moves, right? This is leaving a job that you've been in for some time and going into a different role. That brings up a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions around the role that you're in. Maybe it's the relationships you've formed with your colleagues. Sometimes there are financial implications that will affect you and your family, and you're trying to decide how to navigate that. It can be that you like where you are, but you don't see the long term, how it's going to work in the long term for you. It could be you really don't like it, right? You really don't like where you are, but you don't see yourself as having options. And so there's all these different decisions that will come up, and they're going to look different for you depending on the stage of life that you're at and the decisions that are in front of you. And so today, what I'd love for you to do is be thinking about that particular decision and how what we talk about applies to you. So I mentioned there are really 3 main tools or concepts, and the first of those is time. So whenever you've got something that you need to decide, I find it very helpful to give yourself a time frame. I will do this with every client who I speak with who has some sort of a goal or a decision they're trying to make. The first question I will almost always ask is, when do you want to have your decision made? When do you want to do this by? And the reason for that is that you immediately set a container. You immediately set a time frame, a structure, a parameter that is measurable to contain this decision. And you might think about it as the equivalent of setting a trial date. If you're a litigator, right? You get your file, you set a trial date, you now know that there's an end date. You might push that trial date back if you have to, but there's a container that you're working toward. And when it comes to making a timeline for your decision, what I want to encourage you to do is think about that timeline in a way that is neither too short or too long, something that is more of a Goldilocks approach to the timeline. Now, what do I mean by that? If you create a timeline that is too short, right? You give yourself an artificial deadline and it feels urgent, you risk kicking yourself into that fight or flight reactive mode where you're not making a decision with all of the ingredients in place. You're making a decision with a short-sighted viewpoint that can create the environment where it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction and it's almost like you act in haste. So going back to the analogy of litigation, back when I used to litigate, in order to promote settlement, right? For any litigators out there, you may do this as well, right? You've got your file, you've got your case. You are, on the one hand, preparing to take it to whatever dispute resolution forum is available. And at the same time, you're looking at settlement options along the way. And one way to assess whether settlement is a viable option is to have the pressure of events in the litigation process, whether it's a discovery, whether it's an application, whether it's a trial, because at those junctures, the parties are forced to evaluate, is it worth it to keep fighting or should we settle? So those pressure points, as you may know, often lead to decisions being made. So for you and your decision-making, yes, it can be helpful to integrate some short-term timelines into the overall decision-making process. It's a great way to build and sustain momentum. But the ultimate decision is one that you want to make sure you give yourself enough time to make, right? We don't want to jump into it because that's sometimes where you will find yourself making a rash decision, a reactive decision, a decision that you later regret. So we don't want to do that. We want to give yourself enough time. Now, at the opposite end of the spectrum, you don't want to give yourself so much time that the decision remains unmade, right? If you think about priorities and procrastination and what is most at risk of not getting done, typically what I see people push off into the future indefinitely are decisions or tasks that are important but not urgent. So if you're familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, there's this idea that you can sort your priorities based on what is urgent and important. And in the important and urgent category, you will do the thing, right? If it's a filing deadline, it's as good as done. If you break your arm, you're going to the hospital. But that business development project that nobody's really going to check in on, that might be important but not urgent. It might get put away on a shelf and not attended to because other more important and urgent matters are getting in the way. And so if you've got a decision that is important but not urgent, it may risk moving into that indefinite push off to the future land unless there's something that is going to lock it into place. So we don't want the timeline to be too long. We don't want it to be too short. We want to take the Goldilocks approach and make it just right. Now, a couple of notes here. Number one is a concept of Eigensight, which I've spoken about on the podcast before, not for quite some time actually. It's way back at episode 153. Oh, actually 100 episodes ago, which is crazy to think about. It's a term that I learned about when I read the book 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. It is a German term that roughly translates to the time inherent in the process. So I like to think of it in terms of vegetables or fruits or flowers or something in nature that ripens. And the example that comes to mind today is avocados. And for any of you who enjoy eating avocados, you'll be able to relate to this example, I'm sure. When I go to buy avocados, and I love avocados, I always like to have them in stock. When I go to the store to buy them, they are most often green, and not green as in ripe and ready green, but that light green. They're very firm to the touch, more firm than ripe. And I know that if I buy them today, it'll be probably 3-ish or more days until they're ready to be eaten. So there is a algorithm, if you will, to how I buy avocados, because I know that I will buy them at the store, take them home, I'll put them in a bag, I'll tuck them away somewhere dark and warm, and I will wait, right? There's nothing I can do while I'm waiting to make those avocados ripen more quickly. There is Eigenzeit. There is time inherent in the process for those avocados to ripen. So for your decision, when you're thinking about setting a timeline, there will be a time inherent in the process itself. If you're looking for a new role, that time inherent in the process will probably require you to do some reflection on what you're truly wanting to do with your career. It will require information gathering, learning what opportunities are out there. It will require the right opportunity being available at the right time. It will require you having a certain level of comfort with discomfort, a readiness to make the transition. And so all of these pieces come together to make up what is the time inherent in the process. So much like we can't force the avocado to be riper faster, I suppose you can create the optimal conditions. If I put it in the refrigerator, it will slow down. If I take it out of the refrigerator, it will speed up. So we can do things to influence the time, but ultimately there is a time inherent in the process, and we want to be respectful of that. Now, the second thing I'd offer here is that while you are in that zone of the decision not having yet been made, so let's say you're at job A and you're thinking about, is this the job for me or do I want job B? I highly encourage you to take the parallel tracks approach. And this is a concept that I often share with my coaching clients because I think it's a useful and tangible way to think about where you are right now and where you're going. And what the parallel tracks alludes to in my world is that you are very likely on a path with, let's say, your employer. If you're in a situation where you're an employee, right? You're a lawyer at a law firm or an organization. You may be a partner at your organization. You may be a practice owner, and you're thinking about doing something different. So the idea here is that you are on a parallel track when you and the organization that you're with are aligned in your interests. So for example, if you work at a law firm and you are putting all of your heart and soul into your role, you are doing work to the best of your ability. You are nurturing relationships within the organization. You're doing outreach and promoting yourself and developing relationships within the legal community and the broader community, showcasing the way that you can support your clients. All of that will benefit you and it will benefit your employer. You're on parallel tracks. And at some point, you may choose to leave, in which case your paths are going to diverge. But in the interim, you want to think about how can you, in alignment with where you are right now, work to the maximum of your potential. And by work, I don't mean necessarily work as in grind yourself to dust. That's not what I'm saying. But how can you amplify, maximize, do the most in the spot you're in, right? Bloom where you're planted in order to maximize your opportunities and also the opportunities of your employer organization. So while you are in this zone of making a decision, let's say it's a relationship with a colleague or somebody who's on your team, and there may be a rupture that you can anticipate, what can you do now that, maximizes the chances of this relationship working out? Whether that person stays on your team, for example, maybe it's a team member that maybe you need to consider whether you let them go. Okay, if you can do everything in your power to make it work, then either they stay on, things are working great, or when you part ways, you feel like you've done everything that you could have possibly done in order to make it work. And now you feel peaceful about letting it go. If you're in a job, for example, you do everything in your power to make it work. If at the end of that, it still doesn't work, you are now in a better position to find a different role because you've developed your skills, you've developed your relationships, you're feeling good about your own ability to produce, and you're also feeling like I gave it my all here and you're able to leave on the best possible terms. So that's the concept of parallel tracks. So that really falls into that first category. You're stuck in a decision. And so what do we want to do? We want to set a timeline, something that's not so short that you're spinning and reactive and taking the first option or opportunity that comes your way. But it's also not a timeline that is so long that the decision will continue to drift. So it's something in the middle. And during that time, we want to be mindful of the time inherent in that process, the Eigensight, and also what can we do proactively to make the most of the situation that we're in, order that when you do ultimately make that decision, you can feel really good about it and you will be better poised for your next step. So that brings us to the second category of strategy or an approach to your decision making. And that is to evaluate the reasons that you're leaning on in making a decision. And I'll offer straight up that there are 3 categories of reasons that I would like you to consider. And the first is all head, the second is all heart, and the third is faith or grace. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to making decisions, there's going to be a temptation to think about the facts, which you should. We all need to look at the facts when we're making a decision. What are the practical implications that will result from choosing path A or path B, right? If you're thinking about a job, it's probably the hours, the location, compensation, opportunities for advancement, the role that you're going to be in, the type of work you're going to be doing, the people you'll be working with. All of those are facts. And so we want to make sure that when you are making a decision, you're looking at all the facts that you need to consider. Now, when it comes to looking at the facts, what I have noticed among lawyers is that facts often are the primary set of criteria that are considered in making a decision. And I think that's important. I think it's also helpful to know that it is not the only basis upon which to make a decision, right? You've probably done that exercise of making a list of pros and cons, and the pros and the cons, and you try to weigh them, and maybe you allocate values or numbers to each of the factors so that, you end up with 32 points in the pros and 64 points in the cons. And so the decision is obvious. But really, when it comes down to boiling it to facts, it's really hard if you're just going based on facts to make a decision that will feel good. And again, I'm not saying it very well, but when it comes to decision making, I think lawyers will tend to look at the logic and the facts and give them more weight than the other 2 categories. And so when you're looking at your decision, yes, absolutely look at the facts. And in addition to that, what I would love for you to do is also look at the feelings. So this is a category where I know for myself, I have overlooked feelings way too much in my lifetime. I'm not doing that as much anymore because I'm so much more aware of my feelings. I've gone through coach training. I follow all sorts of different coaches and I read on this topic, and I'm fascinated by emotions and how they influence our decisions and the role they play in our lives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that you need to do the same. However, there is real value to how you feel about the different elements of the choices that you're making. So in a job situation where you're weighing the idea of being in one role versus another, I absolutely would love for you to be thinking about how you feel when it comes to the different options that you have. If you notice day to day that every time somebody sends you an email and they ask you to report on a file, if there are files where you feel a pit in your stomach and you dread writing that email, and instead of writing that email, you push it off to the end of the day, but then the end of the day comes and you haven't done it, so you push it off to the next day, and it keeps going until Friday until you're like, okay, I can't put this off any longer. I just have to do this. Whereas there's another type of file where somebody sends you a note and there's a hint of something that could be of interest and you are on it. You're phoning that person, you're running to their office, you're asking all the questions, you're excited to work on it. Those are your emotions at play. Those are your emotions that are driving the action or the inaction at your work. And so when it comes to the decisions that you're making, these are career decisions. They could be decisions based on who you're working with, the type of work that you're doing, the type of client that you want to work with, noticing how you feel. Because if your day is full of tasks that you dread, working with people where you feel uncomfortable, where you are constantly in that state of dread or stress or avoidance, it's going to take so much more energy Then if you're in an environment where there's a mix, right? I think there's always going to be something in a job that's going to be a little bit less than ideal, right? It might be the paperwork, it might be certain difficult conversations, it might be the hours, it might be, the more tedious tasks that allow you to do the more exciting tasks. I mean, there's typically going to be something that you dread, but what is the ratio, right? If you're 80% dread, 20% enjoyment, can we realign the focus of your work so that it's 20% dread, 80% enjoyment? So again, going back to decision making, yes, you're probably doing the T-chart, looking at the pros and cons. Emotionally, right? Not just the facts, but emotionally, which way are you leaning? And what's really interesting is with these types of decisions is often you'll notice that when you step back, one branch, let's say you've got two options open to you, one branch will almost always have a safeness to it, or a safety, I guess, where you feel like, okay, it's familiar, it's safe, it's not really what I want, but I don't feel like I'm putting myself out there. I don't feel like it is as risky, even though in a sense it is, because you are in effect making a fresh decision. It's just that the risk isn't new versus the decision where the risk is more change, right? You're stepping into a zone where everything is going to be new to you. And so there's a fear associated with that. The unknown creates this sense of uncertainty. Maybe it's that stress of not knowing if it's going to work. And so you might notice that there are underlying emotions that prevail on either side of that decision. And so you might notice, are you motivated more by fear, or are you motivated more by the pull, the draw of something that is promising, that could be something bigger than what you have right now or better than what you have right now? So again, we're just wanting to lean into the emotion of it. And then finally, this third category, and I've described it as faith or grace. Everyone will have a different sense of what that is. And to me, what that is, it means leaving space for the idea that you can make a decision based on what you know, whether it's the facts, whether it's how you feel. And there's this other element of a decision where you have really no control, but the fact of the decision will open up options and possibilities that you may not currently see. And if you think about this from a time perspective, you know that things will shift over time, right? We know that AI, for example, is developing at a quick pace, and that is going to influence the way that we all work going forward. If you've got children, young children at home, and you see how year to year they evolve so much and your life changes as a result because you're the parent, you're living with them. I've noticed with my children that the role that I play shifts over time, right? It went from being a very physical, hands-on, I'm literally helping you tie your shoes, to a much different role. I'm having conversations with my children where I'm helping them make decisions, right? The role I'm playing is shifting. And so for your decisions, you might be thinking about them based on the world as it is today or the facts as they are today. And all of that is going to change. So you might ask yourself, what can I conceive of in the next few years? How might things evolve? And also, what can't you see? And the only way to know that is to let the decision unfold. So I wish I had a crystal ball and could say, well, this is how it's going to turn out. But when you're making those decisions, you don't want it to be all facts. You don't want it to be all emotions. You don't want to leave it all up to chance. What you want to think about is, how do I blend all of these three approaches into a way that feels good to you? And sometimes it helps to put percentages. I love assigning percentages. So maybe it's a third each. I want to give a third of the decision-making, the reasoning to the facts. I want to give a third attention to how I feel. And also, what does your gut tell you? What is that sort of magic, je ne sais quoi, the faith, the grace, the things that could happen as a result if I make this decision, if you make this decision? So that's the second category I'd encourage you to think about. And while we're here, there's a really neat concept that I learned through the work of Martha Beck. Martha Beck is a life coach, and she has a really wonderful model for change. It's called the transition cycle, and it's basically broken up into, I think it's the change cycle. It's broken up into 4 different stages. Death and rebirth is the first, dreaming and scheming is the second, The hero's journey is the third, and then fourth is the promised land, right? So you have a catalytic event, something that triggers a change, and then you get launched into this cycle. And what's so interesting is in that first quadrant, the death and rebirth, she talks about a liminal period. And it's where you're going from where you were to where you're going. So you can imagine making a decision where you're transitioning from, container A into container B. And while you're between those two containers, you're in this zone of not really being in one place or the other. You're neither here nor there. If you imagine yourself crossing a riverbed, for example, you may be standing on shore A and you're swimming over to shore B. And when you start out, you know that shore B is across, but you can't see it. So you start swimming out and you get into the middle of that riverbed or that river, and you can no longer see shore A, but you can't see shore B either. That's that liminal period. And so when you're making a decision where you are stepping into the unknown, you can expect that there's going to be that period. So going back to this idea of how you're feeling and the discomfort, you can anticipate that's going to be part of it. And what she says is that it's in those moments that you need to turn to your inner GPS. You need to reconnect with your values. You need to trust yourself to keep moving in the right direction. And that's basically what I'm encouraging you to think about here as well, is as you're navigating those decisions, what feels right to you? Where do you feel is that internal GPS, that direction that's going to lead you to the place that you need to be? So that is the second category. And that leads us to the third category of factor that I would love for you to consider when you're making a decision and you're thinking, I don't want to make the wrong decision. And so it's going to sound, you can decide how it's going to sound. But here's the idea. Here's the offering, is the idea that there is no such thing as a right or a wrong decision. So what if neither is true? There are only decisions. And whatever decision you make, right, whether the decision is to not make a decision, to postpone a decision and to stay the course, or your decision is that you're going to make changes, you're going to do everything differently going forward, then you're going to step into more of, you're not going to step into a world where everything is all of a sudden perfect or a world where everything is all of a sudden bad, right? If you can imagine that right now there's a portfolio of good and bad in your life, right? If you think about work, we talked about how there's going to be pockets of things that you love and pockets of things you don't love. And when you make a move, when you choose to do it differently, chances are you're going to find yourself in a situation where, again, there are things you love, there are things that you don't love. And the question is, which portfolio of good and bad best suits you? What's most aligned with the path that you want to choose? So if you can look at it this way, then there is no right or wrong decision. There are simply decisions. Another way to think about this is failure. A lot of people will avoid doing something because they don't want to fail. And one of the ways that you can circumvent that problem is by reframing failure. You're either winning or you're learning. Failure is no longer part of the vernacular. It's a concept that you can choose not to attach yourself to. It's not failure, it's learning. If you try to do it 5 different ways and none of those ways works out, but you get it on the 6th try, are you ahead? I would say yes, you are. You've learned the ways that don't work, but you've also learned the way that does work. So same thing with decisions. You can make that decision. And if you want to label it a failure, if you want to label it as something that you regret for the rest of your life, then you can do that. Or you can say, you know what, I made this decision. I have so much more information now because I chose to make that decision. And from this place, I'm going to do it differently. And here is where I'd love to challenge the idea that hindsight is 20/20, because I think we can often say, okay, well, I made the decision and it worked out, so I know it was the right decision. Or I made the decision and it was a disaster, so obviously it was the wrong decision. In either of those cases, we're looking back based on the path that we chose, right? If you imagine you're driving in a car and there are 2 possible roads to take, and you take the path on the left, your rear view mirror, that hindsight being 20/20, is for that path. Unless you could also go down the path on the right and look in your rear view mirror, you have no way of knowing whether that would have been, you don't have the 20/20 vision for that either. So what I'm saying here is that it's easy for us to regret. It's easy to say that was the wrong decision based on whatever factors we might consider having made a decision. I don't think it's actually how things play out in truth. The truth is we make decisions, we learn, we move forward, we move on. And it's not to say let's make decisions blindly. Let's not weigh the facts. Let's not consider that one option may give you more of what you want relative to the other, but it's up to you to decide whether a decision that you make is a wrong decision or a right decision. It's up to you to decide whether you have your own back. You're going to make that decision based on the information you have. You're going to move forward. You're going to see, you're going to test, and you can always make a different decision later. I've seen this happen with lawyers that I've worked with where they have made a decision to move on, to move into a different role, and that role wasn't the right role. And so they moved again, and that role turned out to be a better decision for them. But they wouldn't have been able to get to that second role had they not made that first decision to move forward. Sometimes it's a conversation. You decide to have the conversation because you need the information. And maybe the conversation didn't give you exactly what you wanted, but it gave you enough to know how to move forward. So that is that third stage that I'd love for you to consider, which is that idea that a decision isn't necessarily right or wrong. It is a decision. And based on that decision, you have more information with which to move forward. Now, again, taking a big step back, it may be that the decision that you're weighing is a big decision in your mind, right? It's something that will influence a number of different factors in your life. So can we take some of the smaller pieces of that decision and just test them out, almost like a micro experiment to test, right? If you're in a role, for example, and you've reached a point where you would rather, and I've seen this before, you would rather leave your job than have a difficult conversation with a colleague. What if you had that difficult conversation with the colleague and decided to see what would happen as a result? So you might think about the micro decisions that would help you to make a more informed major decision, macro decision as a result. So here we've now covered 3 different areas. And so if you are sitting on a decision right now, you feel like you're at a stuck point, or there's a decision that's fresh, it's just come up and you're trying to make that decision, you don't want to make the wrong decision, we've now got 3 different lenses through which to view that decision. Number 1 is time. How much time do you want to give yourself? Number 2 is what are the factors you're going to take in reaching your decision? And we talked about the logic, right? What are the facts on the ground? What's the black and white? We talked about how you feel, which decision feels better to you, which one feels like it's more of a challenge that you want, which one feels more aligned with what matters to you, which one feels like it's driven by fear, which one feels like it's driven by calling. So what is the feeling? And then that third component, which is the unpredictable, the grace, the elements of what we cannot predict or control, but that will undoubtedly arise as a result of you making a decision. So what is your gut almost is that third category. And then finally, we talked about, third category within the idea of the factors. And then finally, we talked about how you look at that decision. Are you going to label it a wrong decision if you make a decision and things don't go exactly the way that you want? And what I'm inviting you to consider there is that there is no wrong decision, right? There's simply information that you're gathering. Yes, there are some decisions that may work out more to the aligned goal that you have. And we want to make sure that you're making decisions that take that into account, right? We don't want to make these decisions blindly. And when you do make those informed decisions, we also don't want to be regretting them or saying you should have done it differently or you never should have acted. Of course, you should have acted if that's the decision that felt the most correct for you. That was the one that you, based on the facts that you have or had, needed to make. So what I'm going to offer for you then is that if you're in that boat, then please do give yourself the time and space to reflect on your decision. Please do reach out to people who are close to you, who will give you the space that you need to make the decisions in a way that feels right to you. And give yourself the grace and the time and the space. And it could be that you're speaking with mentors. It could be that you've got trusted colleagues, trusted friends. It could be that you're journaling, doing some thought journaling on what it is that you want. You're making your lists. You might reach out to a coach, me or someone like me, a counselor that might be able to help you through this. There are loads of podcast episodes and resources and tools out there that can help you with this process. If you'd like my support, I would love to help you with this. you want to give yourself that space. You want to give this process the attention and the focus that it deserves. And I have faith in you. I have absolute faith that whatever decision is on your mind right now, whatever pathways are open to you or that you wish were open to you, that when you allow yourself to sit with the decision, where you get to evaluate your options, where you get to investigate what the road ahead could possibly look like, and then you feel like it's time. And that feeling might not be, yes, I'm ready because I know exactly how it's going to turn out, but it's like, not to liken you to an avocado, but it's like you've reached that point where the decision is ripe, right? You know it's time, you're ready to make that decision. It's not being forced, it's not premature, it's not a decision that you've waited too long. There is a time where it will feel right, and that's when you get to make your move. So I really hope that this podcast conversation has been one that you feel is supportive, that sees you where you're at, and that offers you some different lenses through which to make the decision that's on your mind. So with that, I'm going to thank you again for joining me this week, and I look forward to reconnecting again with you soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.